Hi, and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is going to be my first ever CJ's Crafts and Crime video. So let's get into our true crime story and make a snow globe tumbler tonight. So our true crime story starts in 1973 in the winter in Washington State. Probably freezing cold because again, it's Washington State. And imagine being 11 years old and you are having a sleepover with your two best friends. And what does every girl, and sometimes boys too, I'm sure, need for any sleepover? You guessed it. Snacks, soda, you know, all the stuff for that movie that you're gonna watch, and of course the all night staying up telling scary stories. So that's exactly what these three girls were doing in 1973, having a sleepover, and they decided that they wanted some snacks. So they were going to walk down to the little corner grocery store, and in like any preteen, they're gonna want to take a shortcut because who wants to walk a long ways? So they took a shortcut, walked through the field that attached from the neighborhood to like the little quick stop grocery store. And they walked through, went into the store, picked out all their snacks, and they were ready to walk back. And as they were approaching the path to go back through the field to go back to the home, they were stopped by what women would call a tall, dark, and handsome. And he looked over at them and he said, "Oh, look, come see the bunny." And before anybody could say anything, one little girl did just that. She ran over to look at the bunny, and he grabbed her and held her knife to her throat and told her and her friends that if they didn't come with him, that he was going to kill all of them. Can't even imagine the fear that that young lady was feeling as she then, as they all three followed him into the field. Once they got into the field, like further enough back and the grass was hiding all of them, he told them to take their clothes off. And I listened to a recording from one of the victims, and she said that he started touching them. And we can all imagine what he was doing and touching. And then she said that she doesn't remember anything much after that until she doesn't remember anything like between that and then him being on top of her. And so she comes to, or she just remembers that part. She says she doesn't know if she blocks it out or if she really just wasn't conscious or what it was, but she remembers him being on top of her. And he gets up, and all three girls are laying on the ground, and they are, of course, you know, upset, scared, you know, who knows what's going to happen next. And he stands up and he says, "Don't tell anyone or I will kill you and your family." And these girls, of course, being 11, what are they going to do? So he walks away, and they sit there for just a minute, and they're kind of frozen. Obviously, they're 11. And they're frozen there. They finally start to get up, they get dressed, and they come out of the field back towards the store. And they walk home like the longer way, so not through the field. And on the way home, of course, they're talking to each other and they're saying, you know, we're never going to tell anybody, and we're never, ever going to speak of this again. So these girls are walking home after this horrific incident with some stranger, and they swear to each other that they're not going to talk to anyone about it and they're not going to tell anyone ever. So sleepover over, right? So the victim that spoke out about this, she said that they all then went to their own separate houses. So she stopped at her house and they continued around the corner and went to their separate houses. She says she ran in the house, she locked the doors, went in her mother's bedroom and locked herself in the bathroom and started to take a shower, where she stayed until her mom discovered her. And of course, her mom comes in and goes, "I thought you were having a sleepover. What's going on?" Little girl starts crying, hysterical. She's curled up in a ball in the shower. And she tells her mom what happened. So come to find out, you know, of course, all the moms are calling each other and they're all talking. And the moms, you know, all realize what's happened, right? So all of the girls have told their moms what's going on. And they rush them, you know, they take them down to the police station. And over the next couple of months, police do interviews and they talk to the girls. The girls go through, of course, you know, medical examinations, interrogations with the police, not interrogations, but questioning with the police, you know, about what really happened, you know, what did he look like, you know, all of those questions that officers would be asking, or should be asking in, you know, a type of situation like this. But then just a few months later, they bring all the girls in and say, we don't believe you. We don't believe it happened. We don't think it's true. And of course, you know, this victim says she was just mortified. She had never been called a liar before. And she says she didn't even know how to react to the fact that they were telling her that she was lying about this. So she goes on with her life, you know, and they never really spoke of it again. The saddest part about it all is that these three girls never spoke again. They were never friends again. They never talked again. So, you know, now, you know, it destroyed those friendships. You know, they've been through this horrible thing together. And now they're not even friends, which is sad, you know. So these girls, you know, go on to grow up, and this victim said that she had repercussions from this. You know, she experienced bedwetting, nosebleeds, emotional stress, emotional damage, disconnect, PTSD. It affected her relationships through her whole life with kids, husbands, friends, trust issues, all of those things. And all because, you know, at the end of the day, her parents ended up thinking, you know, she said that she feels like her parents, you know, didn't believe her because the cops said, oh, this never happened. It never could have happened, you know. So she became like kind of like the outcast. She, you know, and again, you know, these women went into being growing up into being an adults, and never spoke again. Never spoke of it again. Doesn't, you know, she did say that one of the other girls did reach out to her way into adulthood, just trying to deal with the trauma of it. But they didn't stay friends. They didn't stay connected. You know, she says they still don't talk. So, you know, it affected, you know, so much of their life. Well, this incident is where we begin. It's one of the first recorded crimes of the I-5 killer. So of course he didn't kill these girls. He raped them. He molested them. He put them through a horrifying incident at 11 years old. So born on December 26th of 1950 in Salem, Oregon, Randall Woodfield was born to a very respected family in Oregon. You know, very respected family in the community with their jobs and just their community. They had a high standing in their community. He was a star athlete, star football player for both in his middle school and high school years. And, you know, he was Mr. Popular. You know, he was always, you know, around everyone. He had, you know, Mr. Popular, like a football player. So in junior high, though, he was arrested for exposing himself to a group of teen girls. And he was arrested and he was charged with it. And the coach, of course, you know, tried to help him by coaching him and, you know, just trying to counsel him, and his parents forced him to go to counseling. So if any of you have teenagers, you all know that forcing a teenager to do anything is almost impossible. So I'm sure that these parents had a lot of trouble trying to get this kid to actually go to these therapy sessions. But then again, after high school, junior high, his record was expunged, and he went on continuing to live his life. He his coach and his peers, they said that he was nice and gentle and polite, working. He was coachable, hardworking. His peers said that he was very soft-spoken, though, and he was more of a loner, and didn't have very many friends. But they all said he was a great athlete, that he was very much noticed as a great football player. So he obviously was known for, his football skills. Although he was thriving, going to college, and all of this, he started to become, he was still being arrested for petty crimes. Some of which include, in 1970, he was charged because he vandalized his ex-girlfriend's apartment. In 1972 and 1973, he was charged with public indecency. So he was exposing himself still to women. And who knows what other petty crimes that he committed that just weren't even reported. But anyway, he's thriving, doing great, but he's still committing these little petty crimes all over the place. So then in 1974, he drops out of college, only 3 semesters left before he would be gaining his bachelor's degree. Was drafted to the Green Bay Packers. And he was the 428th pick for them that year as a wide receiver. In 1974, in February of 1974, he signed a contract with the Green Bay Packers, but to his very unhappy, surprise there, he was cut during the training camp. So now he has dropped out of college. He's been cut from the Packers. And now what? Now what does he do? He's goes back home to Portland, Oregon, kind of with his his tail between his legs. And after being cut there, he played for the semi-pro Manitowoc Chiefs, and worked for Oshkosh Trucking. He only played for them for 1 season, and then they cut him, and they never brought him back. And there was no real reason as to why they cut him. But I can only imagine the things that they had to cover up while he was on that team, as to why he was cut from that minor league football team. So all of those failures at college and football, and then being, fired from the Packers, that is what birthed the I-5 killer. So now with his failed football star and his crime spree begins. And he is returned to Portland. So in 1975, so just shortly after he returns, several women start to report that they are being held at knife point, and being forced to perform oral sex, and then he robs them. He takes things out of their purse and their handbags. In March of 1975, a woman officer set up a sting operation, and he was then later arrested and found with money that had been marked from the sting operation, and he was arrested. When he was arrested in interrogation, he confessed that, he had in fact, robbed those women, and forced them to do, sexual favors for him. But he blamed it on poor sexual impulse control. So he basically just blamed it on the fact that he has no control over his impulses of things that he needs. So he pled guilty in April of 1975 for a reduced charge of just second-degree robbery. So these women, who have been put through all of this, he doesn't even get charged with what he made them do. He only gets charged for the robbery part. So I can only imagine as a woman how that would make me feel. But at least he's in jail. So he ended up getting a 10-year sentence for those robberies, to which he only served 4 of those years. He He only served 4 of those years. He got out on parole. But it did not start, he didn't take long to start acting up. So in 1979, when he was paroled, his crime spree just started right back up where he left off. I have no idea where his parole officer is, because if he had one, I don't understand how he was able to still continue to commit these crimes. But he did. So in October of 1980, from October of 1980 to January of 1981, so just 4 months. So he gets out of jail, and then within 4 months of him being out, he committed over 14 more crimes. So someone that clearly should have been keeping an closer eye on him, and he clearly should have still been in jail. But that's not what happened, and he is out on the streets. So on October the 9th of 1980, Sherry Lynn, a former classmate of Woodfield, was raped and murdered in her apartment. And her body was not discovered until a few days later on October 11th by her fiance. She was bludgeoned and stabbed repeatedly in the neck. The cops kind of, tied him to this because her and him were, again, old classmates, and she had written him while he was in prison. And so her parents are the ones that turned the cops to, kind of look at him, because, they had written each other from, while he was in prison. And the cops did, in fact, look into him. The law enforcement, they questioned him, and he refused a polygraph test. They said he was very cold and he was very distant during the interview. But unfortunately, his blood DNA did not match the DNA on the sperm. And so he was eventually let go, and he was never charged for that murder. So then just a month later, on the morning of November the 27th, which is now Thanksgiving Day in 1980, he arrives home in Portland, and is going, and he arrives at the home of Darcy Fix. And there at Darcy's home, is her friend, Douglas. And he kills both of them right there on Thanksgiving Day. Both of the victims were bound and shot to death, execution style, in Fix's home, with a .32 caliber revolver. The law enforcement found no concrete evidence that pointed to his involvement, but they did suspect him, again, because, something was tying him to it, right? So within those 4 months of the 14 crimes, it all consisted of robberies, assaults, murders, and he just kept going. And he was then named in January of 1981. He was then being called the I-5 Bandit for the robberies. So after committing the murders of those two, he began his series of robberies all over, up and down I-5. On November the 9th of 1980, he was wearing a fake beard. So he was commonly seen with a fake beard and like tape across his nose, like it was athlete's tape, like kind of like what you see athletes wear over their nose. And so he was disguising himself. So like I said, in 1980, he was wearing that disguise and held up Vancouver, Washington gas station at gunpoint. 4 nights later, on December the 13th, he robbed an ice cream parlor. And on December the 14th, he robbed a drive-in restaurant. During one of the robberies, that's when they discovered that he was wearing that Band-Aid on his nose, and they added that to, the description of it. And it looked like it was nasal strips that are worn by football players. On December the 21st, again, wearing all of his false stuff, trying to conceal his identity, he took a waitress into the restaurant, into a restaurant bathroom, and held her at gunpoint and forced her to masturbate him, and perform oral sex for him. And then by January of 1981, law enforcement had now called him the I-5 bandit. Given his appearance and committed the crimes along the Interstate 5 corridor. On January 8th, he held up that same Vancouver gas station that he had robbed in December. But this time, he forced the female attendants to expose her breast after he emptied out the cash register. Sorry for the pause. Gotta get my glitter going here. So he emptied out the cash register and then 3 days later, on January the 11th, he robbed a market. And then the next day, on the January the 12th, he shot and wounded a 20-year-old grocery clerk, Sue Bennett, in a store in Sherland, Oregon. On January the 14th, a man matching his description invaded a home occupied by two sisters, and they were 8 and 10. So these sisters are 8 years old and 10 years old. Can you imagine? 8 and 10. He ordered the girls to undress. He assaulted them, sexually assaulted them, and then 4 days later, he entered an office building and sexually abused two women, Sherry Hull and Beth Wilmot. After he abused them, he shot both of them. Wilmot survived and lived on to be able to help him become convicted. So again, this was in 4 months, over 14 crimes of robbery, assault, murder. I can't imagine what these women were thinking. Like, I just couldn't. I couldn't imagine living, like, first of all, if you survive that kind of attack, like, how do you go back to being normal in life? How do you go back to live your life? And obviously you can't, right? That woman told us that she never was the same again. She had fear her whole rest of her life. But then later there were more murders. So on February 3rd of 1981, the bodies of Dawn Eckard and her 14-year-old daughter Janelle were found in their home together on the bed. Each had been shot several times in the head, and the test showed that the young 14-year-old girl had been raped and sexually assaulted. The same day, a female clerk was kidnapped and raped in a holdup. An identical crime was reported on February the 4th in Ashland, Oregon, in a motel that night. So this man just continues to go, and it's like every single day, almost. Like, there's not a lot of gaps in between the crimes that he's creating. He just keeps going and going and going. And the cops, haven't caught him. They don't, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if they suspect him in any of these other situations, but he is obviously just out there committing crimes. Then on February 9th, a man matching the I-5 bandit's description held up a fabric store, tying up and molesting the clerk and her customer before he left. So at least he didn't kill those ladies. So sometimes he's killing them, sometimes he's not. So sometimes he's letting them live and they get to just be tortured for the rest of their life with this horrible memory and this event that's happened to them. And then some he's killing them. So there's no real rhyme or reason. There's no real rhyme or reason to his crimes. Sometimes they live, sometimes they die. Up on a pending visit to Portland, so where he's from, on January the 14th, which is Valentine's Day, he decides that he wants to throw a party, and no one shows up. So that just goes to show you how popular he really was now in his adulthood. Washed up football player, no real friends. So no one shows up to his party. So he decides that because no one showed up, that he is going to go and meet up with an old friend, 18-year-old Julie Ritz, who he had met working as a bouncer in a bar. And he shows up to her house at 2 a.m. on February the 15th. Around 4 a.m., he raped and shot Ritz in the head and killed her. Police investigated the scene, determined that Ritz had had a glass of wine with her attacker, and then had begun to prepare coffee. So she obviously let him in as a friend and was going to hang out with him, and he kills her. By February 28th. The investigation was now focused on him for all of these lines of crime. And by then, he's now the I-5 killer. He struck 3 more times, and on February the 18th and 21st with another sexual assault, on February 25th, detectives called, they did a log showing of phone calls. So from, they created a phone log of like calls that he had made from like payphones and stuff like that. And then on March 5th of 1981, he was brought into the Salem Police Department for interrogation after Lisa Garcia positively identified him in a photo lineup. So now they have victims that were able to identify him in their photo lineup. And that's how he was brought in for this interrogation. So he was brought in, and while he was being interrogated, they were then issuing a search warrant on his apartment. Inside that apartment, during that search warrant, they found bullets from the guns that had been used in a bag. And they also found tape that matched several of the crimes where the victims had been bound. He was then on March 16th, he was indicted for murder, rape, sodomy, attempted kidnapping, armed robbery, and illegal possession of firearms were initiated from various jurisdictions in Washington and Oregon. So he has all of these charges that are now brought up against him just from that arrest warrant that he had. So then on June 11th of 1981, the trial for the murder of Hull and the sodomy and attempted murder of Wilmot was opened in Salem. So remember, those are the 2 ladies that he shot both of them, and then Wilmot survived, and she becomes one of the main the main people that testify against him, that gets him convicted. So at that time, the prosecutor for this trial was Chris Van Dyke. The funny part about that is that was actor Dick Van Dyke's son. In Marion County District Attorney is where he was the district attorney. And at the time, he prosecuted that case. And he had several pieces of evidence. But what really nailed it is that he had several victims that they were able to come forward and testify that he had done all of these things to them. So that's what helped them, was that testimony. The jury then convicted him, and he was given life in prison plus 90 years. So he was never getting out. And then in November of 1981, they had a second trial, and it was held in Benton County, Oregon. And he tried to get this trial moved to a different county because he felt that he wasn't going to have a fair trial. Now, just like any case of the nowadays, it's very publicized. It's a very well-known case because obviously you're out killing women up and down I-90 or I-9, I-5, and here you are thinking that you're going to get to move your case and someone may not know it. So ultimately the judge tells him no, like, we're not moving your case. You're going to stay here. So he didn't get to move his case. And he was tried, and the jury added an additional 35 years to his already life plus 90 years sentence that he already had. So post-conviction, so now he's in jail. He's never getting out. He sits in the Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem. And in October of 1983, he was injured by a fellow inmate during a prison disturbance. And that's kind of all it says. And then in April of 1987, he filed for a $12 million lawsuit against Ann Rule. It was the author of the I-5 Killer and the account of Woodfield's life. So he's trying to sue this woman because she wrote about his life. And then ultimately he lost that as well. The judge says, like, no, like, you're not getting money for that. Like, no. So he did not end up winning that case either. Now, since being in jail, he's been married 3 times, divorced twice, which again is extremely crazy to me. Like, why are these women marrying these men in prison? Like, I'll never understand it, especially if they're on death row or in there for life. Like, what's the point? But hey, to each their own, I guess. So again, he's kind of just living his life in prison. And then now, since 1990, after the discovery of more victims, Woodfield is suspected as many as 44 homicides. So this man not only is convicted of what he's got, but they are almost positive that he is responsible for at least 44 other murders and anywhere from 23 to 44 other rapes and robberies of women. Eventually, you know, these women that he divorced, you know, they had written letters back and forth, obviously. Those letters, some of them were ran in a local newspaper or in a local, it was by the Charles Press that was published. And he wrote to the journalist, and his quote to the journalist was, why murder strike out in anger or in rage? How should I know? What a question, Jenny. Care to write more personally, share a photo, talk once by phone? Your choice. So he's still in there writing people, you know, trying to get his story told to these, and he's using, you know, flirty words and stuff like that, just like he always did, because they always said, you know, he was handsome. He was a handsome guy, you know. So obviously, you know, he had a type, but he never had a rhyme or reason to his crimes. He was always were thin white women in their 20s, many of the middle class backgrounds. And so he had a type that he was always going after, but just never any rhyme or reason to the crimes that he committed. So to list some of his victims, and these are the ones that they know about and for sure have him connected to. In 1981, on January the 12th, Sue Bennett, who was a market clerk in Shirley, Oregon, shot by Woodfield during a robbery, and she survived. On January 14th, Mersue and Megan Green, both assaulted at gunpoint in their home, forced to perform oral sex, and they both survived. And then Sherry Lynn Hull and Beth Wilmot, again, those are the 2 ladies that were shot together. And Wilmot is the survivor of that. And she's the one that ultimately testified in his case to help put him away for the murder of, and so for the life plus 90 years case. So then on February 3rd, an unnamed woman kidnapped at gunpoint and raped near Reading, California in the morning hours and survived. And on that same day, Donna Lee Eckard and her daughter Janelle were found sexually assaulted and shot to death in their home. And again, I cannot imagine being a mother and having to watch your daughter basically be killed and attacked in front of you. I could never, and I have a little girl, so I could never imagine that. And then on February the 14th, an unknown woman was kidnapped and raped in California, and she survived. And then Julianne Ritz raped and shot to death in her Beaverton, Oregon home around 4 a.m. and was an acquaintance of Woodfield's through his job as a bartender. So she's that one that he went and attacked after no one showed up to his Valentine's Day party. So he's also connected to several other crimes, like I said. So he also still insists that he is innocent and that he didn't do any of these murders. So since he admitted to the robberies, like after junior high and stuff, and served his 4 years in jail, he never admitted to another crime. He still swears that he didn't do any of these crimes and he didn't commit any of the murders. He sits in jail still saying that he's innocent. So that is the story of the I-5 killer. And tonight we made a snow globe. and it's going to be a teacher one as soon as we are finished, and I will be posting the finished product later, so stay tuned for the finished product of the teacher tumbler. And I hope that you guys enjoyed my very first true crime and crafting. I am going to be going live on TikTok, and I hope to be able to get to go live on YouTube as soon as I'm able to reach 50 subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed, please like and subscribe this video, and I will see you next time.